Good afternoon. Thanks so much for choosing to join this webinar. My name is Mindy Rodenberg, Field Marketing Lead at Squiz. And joining me today, we have Chris Grist, our Senior Product Manager at Squiz, here to show a demo and answer any questions you may have. In this jam-packed session, we'll introduce you to the world of components and how you can take advantage of it to bring speed, ease, and compliance to your content creation and management operations. We'll demonstrate how developers can spin up basic and complex components from start to finish. But for those of you who are marketers, content editors, or digital managers, this is just as exciting for you. We'll be showcasing how editors can easily add, edit, and reuse content across multiple sites or pages. This is a great productivity boost and time saver for lean teams managing a lot of content. For marketing and digital teams responsible for governing your brand across channels and managing duplicate content assets from one place, reimagine how much easier it could be using components. Speed to market can coexist with accuracy and compliance. Before I hand over to Chris to show a demo of component service, I'll mention a few quick housekeeping items. Just a note, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording via email in the next coming days. If you have any technical difficulty during our session, you can use the chat window on the right-hand side. Please submit any questions into the Ask a Question bar located under the chat window. Chris will be answering questions at the end of the demo, but feel free to submit questions throughout. That's the housekeeping for the day. So without further ado, I'll pass this over to Chris to talk more about component service.
Hi, I'm Chris Grist, Senior Product Manager here at Squiz. For the last 18 months, my team and I have been busy working towards Squiz's product vision to be the world's most composable DXP. So you can come as you are, build brilliant experiences fast on a platform that embraces change, meaning that you can be future-proofed to evolve your tech stack. I've been primarily focused on developer experience and how we can improve our platform to be much better for developers. Although everything we're going to show you today ultimately benefits content editors, marketers, and other business stakeholders by giving developers a better way to work on a platform. We officially launched our component service today, and I'm excited to show some demos with you. By the end of the session, you will learn how the new component service increases speed to market for all of your teams. So what is the component service? The component service is just one of many services within the DXP, and one of the many new features we're introducing this year to get us closer to our product vision. Basically, a component can be any section of a web page for displaying structured content or functionality. They're built by developers to enable content editors and the digital team to build pages. But how does the component service benefit you? Well, the component service has drastically reduced the onboarding time for new developers. They can start building new components and launch them if they know JavaScript, removing the need for developers to know the whole platform before they start building new components, and reducing dependence on any single matrix developer. It makes it faster to deploy new sites and microsites from a template, and introduces new functionality to those sites. You can syndicate components, meaning you can share information such as alerts or event information and easily republish across any site, whether that's matrix or a non-matrix site such as WordPress. It's simple to manage and implement web design and replicate across many sites. Here's an example of the landing page that we're going to create today in the demos with 5 different components. Components can be normal elements like these that make up your landing pages or other pages. They can also belong to a design system. Here's an example of the UK government design system implemented within our component service. And here's those components used to build the landing page and matrix. But they can also be something much more complex, kind of like a self-contained app. They can be data-driven components individual to the logged-in user, like these examples from a student portal, with a personal calendar, GPA, and course details. These data-driven components leverage other parts of the DXP, like our data store and our integration platform, but we could also leverage other services like search. We can use search-driven components that generate dynamic listings that can be reused across websites, or in this case, a whole interactive embeddable course finder feature. Everything under the header is one big component, And this could be reused again and again on different marketing landing pages, as well as the main site. Students can interact with the tool through to the comparison feature that lets them find the course that is best suited to them. Because the component service is built in a composable way, independently from the CMS, we can take these components that use all the DXP capabilities, package them up, and actually deploy them to your other websites as well. So for example, we could take an events listing powered by Funnelback, and we could deploy that component onto a range of different sites and microsites and other platforms outside of the DXP. Another simple but powerful use case here is being able to create an alert banner component and publish alerts across your whole web presence, with the branding and the content managed and governed centrally within the DXP. There are three main personas that can benefit from Squiz's component service, and they are developers, content editors, and web and digital teams. In the next 20 minutes, I'll take you through a demonstration of our component service so you can see how developers can reduce development time and maintenance cost of sites, content editors can create unique pages, stories, and marketing campaigns fast without ongoing developer support, web, digital, and marketing teams can save time, govern content with ease, and get total control over their brand. So what does the component service actually change if you're using Matrix today? Well, the main thing is that we've pulled the component service out as its own separate part of the platform, which allows us to serve developers directly in a way that is more suitable to them, allowing them to write native code in their local environment and test locally using standard JavaScript or frameworks of their choice, and allowing them to bring in some automation around testing and deployment. All of this adds up to much better autonomy and a faster feedback loop for developers. Developers can work independently and they can work on one feature of the website without having to touch the rest of it, which makes it much easier to work with Squiz services or your partner agencies. Our editors can then use these components in the existing Matrix interface. Ultimately, this gives editors more autonomy and a faster feedback loop as well. Finally, our web managers and web teams, they will now have a set of tools to allow them to manage component libraries. And there's a whole set of features around managing versions of components, so developers can comfortably deploy and automate their deployment, but the stakeholders can choose when they decide to roll out different versions of the components to different libraries. So this might be a test and production library, but it could also be completely different branding for different marketing microsites, or any purpose that the web managers see fit. They'll also be able to preview the components and share those previews with stakeholders. And these features add up to much greater visibility and governance for web managers and web and digital teams across large organizations. So before we get into the demo, let's have a look at what we're going to build. So I'm going to preview this page in Matrix. This is already built. This is our landing page made up of components with all of the content coming from Matrix content in the component service. So we can see at the top we've got our alert banner, we've got a big hero carousel, and below that we've got a find a course panel. Then we've got a couple of other components here. But if I switch now to the business school site, we're going to see an alternate version of the design system. So everything looks similar, but a little bit different, and not just styling different from CSS style sheets, but functionally different as well. So a lot of things like the news here that was previously a carousel and the course listing, they're functionally different as well as styled differently. So we'll show how we're going to build all of this. First up, we'll focus on the demo for developers. We're going to start with our alert bar. And then we'll make a more complex component with the course list. So I start by opening my code editor. You can see here on the left all of the components I've already got, but I'm going to open a terminal within VS Code to start creating a new one. To do that, I type in dxp-next cmp init and the name of the component, alert banner, hit enter, and it's automatically creating me a folder with all of the details to get started working on that component. I've got a couple of folders, a JavaScript file, and this manifest.json, the key file for setting up our component. We'll set the name to alert banner, and we'll set up a namespace which allows us to organize our different components so they don't clash. We'll give it a friendly name of alert bar. We can also set up a description, and this is going to come in handy for when content editors are choosing which components to put on a page later. The version we're going to leave as the default, which is 001. Here we can set up an icon, so I'm going to choose a code from the Material UI library, and I can configure a hex color for the icon as well. This is going to make it much more scannable for content editors and other stakeholders when they browse component libraries. The functions field is where we configure most of our component. So it tells us which JavaScript file we're using to render our function, but the input field is the most important one. This is where we define the data model. And to do that, I can use JSON schema, which is a nice industry standard with lots of tooling. And I can start to define data structures like an object with required fields, with titles and properties, and I can do arrays inside of the objects. For now, I'm going to add in an alert title, an alert content, and I'll also add in an alert color, which editors can use to change the background color of the alert. And I'll add in an alert status field so that editors can easily turn an alert on and off. But these are just the names of the fields. What we want to do next is actually set up the types of fields, and these will be used to automatically generate an editing form for our editors. Now within each of my fields, I can define a title, which will be displayed in the editing form. So we want it to say alert title. I can put in a description for each field, so usually a 1 to 2 sentence description to help out editors when they're editing the form. And also define the data type. So this one's just going to be a string. It's just plain text. And the alert content is going to be very similar to the alert title. It's another text box, basically. But for our alert color, we're going to do something a little bit more specific. So I want the editors to choose from a list of allowed colors. So we're going to have red, orange, yellow, cyan, and blue. For this, we can use the enum field, and that not only constrains the input, it'll generate a select list to make it easy to choose one of the options. Our alert status is a different data type again. It's a Boolean field, so a simple yes or no. Now, let's switch to our JavaScript rendering function. By default, it just gives us a very simple function that returns one hello world string. We'll add our own code in here now, starting with a simple map of the input colors to the specific hex codes. Next, we'll select the color that we want to use as the background color based on the input object that is passed into the rendering function. Now we're going to add an if statement here to check the alert status also from the same input object. If the alert status is false, then we'll simply return a HTML comment. If the alert is enabled, then we're going to render the component. But our hello world template literal won't get us too far. I'll expand on this template and I'm adding in a wrapping div, and you can see here in the top right, I'm printing the color in an inline style. Adding in some more containers here for the layout of our alert. And then finally, printing the input title into the left-hand column. And our alert content into the right-hand column. Now we're going to want to test out our template and see how our component renders. To do that, we go over to the previews folder and we set up some mock preview data. This data is in JSON format and it fulfills the JSON schema we created in the input section of the manifest before. So we'll go ahead and create some mock data for an alert. We enter the alert title, alert contents, and so on, and we're going to create some content about a storm warning that's going to be put up across the top of all of the websites to alert students. Then we'll switch over to the preview.html file, which is like a wrapper that helps us provide any global styling scripts or HTML structure that we need to preview the component properly. For now, I'm just adding one global script tag. I'll start up the terminal again, and this time we'll run the local dev server by running dxpnex cmp dev and the name of the component. The server starts and we get a list of all components, in this case alert banner. And here's our yellow storm warning in the layout that we coded. But let's test some changes. We'll change the text, change the color, and we can see that preview again. We can see it in orange, and we can try turning the status off as well, and we can see the alert is not displayed. Now that we've tested our component, let's go ahead and deploy it. So we log into the DXP console in the CLI. We type in the DXP deploy command. Our component is deployed instantly, and we should now be able to find it on the all component screen. There's our alert bar. And when we click through, we're going to see the same previews we tested with locally, which makes it really easy to share my progress with content editors, designers, and other stakeholders. But of course, our alert bar is probably the most simple possible component. Let's have a look at something more complex that we've already set up, which is our course listing component. This one is intended as a list of promoted courses for use on a landing page. So it's going to show a card for each course. One of the first things that's new here is this environment line, and we've got an environment named alt. And we'll come back to that throughout the demo. When we go down to the input object, it's much more involved. So we've got a courses field here, which is a type of array, and that array is an array of objects, which each have their own properties, such as title, school, and URL. Now switching over to the main JavaScript file, we can see here that we've loaded in a few libraries to our component. We're using handlebars for templating. We're also using the info object, which lets us access the environment variable we saw configured in the manifest, which we're using then to conditionally load a different template for the business school. And then finally, we're rendering the handlebars template. By separating our templates out and using handlebars, we can make our code much simpler, and we can have dedicated templates for really clear purposes. We loop through the course objects in the courses array and then display content for each course. Now we can use anything here like JSX, React, Vue, but handlebars is just a nice simple example. Let's run our development server again, and this time we've got a whole set of components here. This time I've got a more interesting component here that I can interact with some more content in it. But let's come back to that environment variable we mentioned earlier. I'm going to set a local environment variable in my command line interface and run the development server again. And when I click on the course list, now I can see a completely different look and feel. With the environment variable set, we're now loading in the template used by the business school for their variant of the design system, while we keep everything packaged together in one component. Now let's focus on the content editing experience and see how content editors can create content faster with components. We're going to use our same university landing page example, and we're going to use the components from before. We're going to add a course list, a hero banner slider, and an alert bar. In the DXP console, we have a library for our design system, and we click through to the course list component, and we can see here the preview of the latest version of the course component, which we can interact with. In Matrix Admin, we'll start with a blank page, and we click Edit, click the plus icon, and we select our components from the right-hand menu. We've selected the course list, and we're going to add some content to that. We can click a plus icon to add the individual course records, and we can add as many of those items as we like. I'll go ahead and fill out all the content for those. We've got names and descriptions and schools and images. And now we want to click on the page and preview it in a new window. And we can see here our component behaving just like it did in the DXP console, but now with the real content from the CMS. I'm going to load the edit screen and the real page side by side, so I can show, as I'm editing the content, I'm changing the title and the introductory text, and now I'm going to drag and drop and rearrange the courses. I'm just going to change the order of the courses in the component when I save and reload the page. So as we reload the page, we can see the Astrotourism course is now in first place. Now we'll test the hero banner slider. Again, we'll preview it so we can kind of play around and see what this component is going to look like when we add it to the page. Make sure it's the right one we want to use. We can test all of the animations with the preview content. Back in Matrix Admin, again, we'll click on our plus icon, select the hero banner slider this time, and we can start adding slides. I click Show Advanced Settings, which gives me some conditional fields for a more advanced user, and then I add the rest of the slides. Let's do one more. Back in the DXP console, we'll check out the testimonials component. Again, look at some of the sample content. We'll add that to the page by choosing testimonials from the right-hand column. And then we'll add in our content and quotes. Now that we've built out the content on our page, we can preview it again. We can click through and see all of the content we've added to the sliders. To the course listing, and to the testimonials from our happy students. We've been able to pull together the whole landing page very quickly with components. But let's look at one last use case for content reuse with our alerts component. So we have a page with an alert component on it, and we're going to add a second alert. This time it's a heat wave, and it's cyan color because it's not quite as serious as the thunderstorm. When we reload the page, we see the second alert on the page, and this can be distributed out to lots of our different sites. Now we've seen how developers build components and how editors can use them. Let's have a look at some of the features for web, digital, and marketing teams to help govern component libraries and design systems. Within the DXP, you can have many different component libraries. I'm going to select the university one and we'll add some new components to this library. I'll select the course list component and I'll accept all the version settings by default. I'll do the same to add my testimonials component into the library as well. So I've already got a design system set for my library, but I want to do something a little bit different now. I actually want to create a specialized design system for the business school. So they have their own sub-brand, which is similar to the university, but behaves a little bit different and has its own look and feel. So I want to organize a set of components around that and make it available to my business school stakeholders. Creating the new set is as simple as adding in the name, an identifier, and a description that's going to help explain what the component library is for. And then clicking create. A brand new empty component set. Now I can add the components just like I did before, or I could add different components as well that are specific to business. This time when I add the course list component, I'm going to take a closer look at these version settings. This is where I can exercise a lot of control around which versions of components that are updated and deployed by developers are released to my stakeholders. So I could specify here only version 005 can be used, which would mean that version 006, which is already released, and any new versions wouldn't be released to the business school straight away. This is really important when we want to stage a rollout of a design system, especially to different sub-brands within a large federated organization. There's also fine-grained controls for choosing multiple specific editable versions. This is mostly useful for special handling of breaking changes between multiple versions. There's also options to block specific versions that have been published in the past in case they have an issue with content or security. The last powerful feature that we want to show from the component sets is the environment variables feature. This is often used for API keys and other secrets, but today we're going to use a visual example by demonstrating the business school sub-brand. So let's check out the business school homepage. We've got the same components, but different content, specialized content for the business school. And when we preview that, it's going to look exactly the same as the homepage, just with different content, different images in the slider, and so on. If I open up the university and business homepages side by side, we can see that they look very, very similar, which you want with a design system. But with our business school, we do have a sub-brand that we want to apply. To do that, I'll go back to the DXP console, to my School of Business Design System library, and I'll click on Environment Variables, and I'll add a variable. I'm going to call it Alt, which is the one we used in the earlier developer example, and I'm going to set the value of business, just like we used when we tested locally. When I reload the site now, I can see that all of the components are automatically picking up the business variants and displaying the different business styling and business functionality. The courses are flattened into a list without a carousel, and the rest of the site is following a consistent styling for the business sub-brand.
So we've come to the end of the presentation, and you've just seen one example of using an alert banner, carousel, and course listing components on a landing page. There are many more possibilities for how the components can be used across different CMSs, sites, and channels. I'll now pass over to Chris to go through some of your questions.
Thanks for that, Mindy, and thanks everyone for your time and for your questions. I'll start with your question, Jeff. So there was a question there around, are these code elements hosted on a Squiz server? And so, yeah, basically everything we saw there was eventually deployed to the Squiz DXP. One of the really important things we're doing with this is opening up the source of truth for that code to be owned by your development team, or it could be Squiz implementing for you, or a third-party partner. The code is deployed to the Squiz DXP for it to run, but you can actually manage that code outside. And one of the really important points of doing that is how that speeds up development for development teams, whether they're new to our platform completely or whether they've used the platform for a long time. Being able to work independently on those components without having to know the rest of the platform, we think will really speed up how people can kind of build and optimize their experiences. So hopefully that answers your question, a couple parts of that. Excuse me. Do keep the questions coming if anyone else has any other questions. We've got a couple more here. So one of the questions was, can I embed components across other CMS sites and channels? And so this is something, this is actually a really important part of the design as well. In separating out the component service so it's its own independent part of the platform, not only does that allow us to really optimize the developer experience and unlock developers to work faster, but it also allows us to do things like starting to use those parts of the front end on other experiences as well. So the examples today were all based on some sort of fake university websites, but whether this is universities or government or other large organizations, the ability to be able to say, here's some centrally managed parts of our experience and be able to deploy those to, say, some other portals or legacy platforms or other web presence owned by different parts of a federated organization, we're hoping is going to be very powerful because it really gives you some flexibility to essentially manage and control parts of the experience, even if you've got many different platforms running parts of your web experience. And so I'll move on to the next question in the queue. So this is about how does the component service work with other Squiz capabilities such as funnel back search? So a lot of our customers maybe they had funnel back first before they moved to a web platform, or many of our customers use our funnel back search product as well. Very good for indexing and searching across a large web presence. Again, talking about the composability aspect, the components being built independently from the CMS make it really easy for us now to surface all of the different parts of the DXP, whatever functionality they can provide. So things like search or our integration platform or our data platform or other things we've got that are coming up that are going to be released. It makes it really easy for a developer to say, I want to use that service, but I want to package that up and present it with a component. And then that component can be used by an editor on the website, again, on a third-party website. Funnelback search is a particularly good example for this because we can do a lot of things like dynamic content. So a content editor might just simply add a component, choose how they want that to display. Maybe it's a listing or it's cars or an accordion, and choose a content type and enter some values that are going to automatically generate a query, a search query, and then we can get search-driven content right on the page. So this is really powerful for like pathway pages and landing pages that really list a lot of different aspects of content within an organization. So going back to that university example, things like course listings, news and events, researchers, staff profiles, and things like that. We can really start to do a lot with search-driven content, and components is fantastic for unlocking that. But anything else as well with pulling in integrations and surfacing those in components. This combines really well with the previous question in that because we make it much simpler to surface that valuable functionality of the DXP, but we can also package that up in a component. We can take that power outside of our platform and put a there's an example, of course, in the presentation about a course finder tool that was driven with Funnelback. We can go and embed that on some third-party site. Maybe your open day site runs on another platform, and we can embed that there. Excuse me. And so the next question is, can you give me an example of how a higher education institution is using components? Yes, definitely. So, although we're just launching this week, we have been working with several customers already. And so we have some customers who are definitely the main theme is building out design systems. So a lot of the universities already have an implementation of a design system for their web presence, or they might actually have multiple because often they've come up with a design system. They've got the documentation, the examples, but then they've got to implement that design system multiple times to work on multiple platforms. So that's probably the focus for a lot of our higher education customers so far is building out a better implementation of their design system. Um, and the benefits there are it really reduces sort of the time to iterate and understand the real implementation of that design system with stakeholders because I can work with a developer. They can produce something locally. They can test it, and using that preview feature that we saw in the DXP console, they can share that, and we can get the designers to review it. We can get stakeholders in the university. So maybe there's a important head of school in one of the schools that really wants to sign off on how this is going to look on their new web presence for some reason. There's no reason we can't get them involved, and they don't need to get into the back end of the CMS to see anything. We can show them the real, here's how the design elements will look, but also how they'll look and feel, how they'll interact, how people will navigate through content, and so on. So, examples of higher education institutions today, definitely design systems, but also certainly some more complex projects like those course finding tools and so on. So I'll move on to the next question there. So following on from the integration piece, are we exploring a supported or baked in bridge or hook in for data store? It's an excellent question. So the way that data store works currently, and if you're not familiar with our platform, you may not know, but data store is basically a tool where developers can build and deploy their own APIs to store and retrieve data. So similar to what we saw with the component code, a developer can kind of define a schema for what their data records will look like. They can deploy that to the service, and now they've got an API ready to go that they can use to build apps and interactions and integrations and so on. So in terms of using that then in components, today it's basically just talking directly to that data store API. So we don't need a baked-in bridge in the way that we would with something like Matrix CMS. So previously when we used data store directly with the CMS, we've got things that basically enable you to surface a connection with data store or with other integrations where we've got a baked-in bridge like that. We don't have that right now in components. One of the benefits of moving to that component model is what we can do in a UI with a bridge with a fair bit of work in the platform. Developers can do much more directly with a couple of lines of code. So what we'll be probably looking at in terms of improving and optimizing that would be improving SDKs to make that code really trivial to include in those components. So it really is just, get this thing from the data store and not all of the boilerplate code to set that up. So I hope that answered your question. Do feel free to ask a follow-up clarification if there's more to that I've missed. And so the next one was, do I need to be using Squiz CMS to use component servers? Excuse me. So it does. You do need to have the Squiz GXP, so the broader platform that the component service belongs to. You don't need to use it with the CMS, so you could do things like components that are used on a separate front end using things like Funnelback, for example, to do like a search only site. The main thing is though, you will need the integration with the Squiz CMS matrix to be able to get the editing experience that we saw. There's other ways that you can provide content to the components, but the built-in way is using that editing experience in the CMS. So while you can use them independently, using it with the CMS gives you that editing experience to be able to author the content. And so just coming back to what we were discussing before about integration, sort of follow up there. Okay, I think that an SDK is a perfect solution. Fantastic. So that's generally the plans for moving forward is shore up and improve the SDKs or software development kits. Basically, these are libraries that make it trivial for developers to use those services without having to think too much about all the extra details of how to talk to the service. Brilliant. And so I think the next question in the queue, when will the component service be available to use? So this is available right now. It is available for our Squiz DXP customers, and we can turn this on for you. So it's not switched on out of the box, ready for everyone. If you want to get your hands on the component service to use in the DXP, then please reach out to your account manager. They can talk to you about how we go about turning that on for you. That said, because this is something that we want to make very easy for the developers that use our platform to pick up and learn, you can actually use the local dev tools of the component service without access to the DXP. So when I was showing developers coding some components, testing them locally, and previewing the real content and the component just locally in their browser, that whole stage can be done prior to having access to the DXP. Those can be built and tested, and then when you've got when you're using it with the DXP, you can deploy them and use them in the CMS or outside of the CMS. So running them independently. The reason we've got that there is developers can get in, check it out, understand what that service is, get a better handle on how they use it. The documentation is there. So that's all public at the moment. More documentation and guides to come, but there's enough there to get started and start testing that out locally. So, sorry, that was a long answer. Short answer is when's the component service available to use? That's right now. But for existing customers, reach out to your account managers. There may be some additions, changes to infrastructure config we may need to make. Reach out to your account manager and have that conversation, but it is available now. And let me just see. All right, I think that might be it for the Q&A. I'll just double check in case I've missed anything. Okay, so there's yes, this is a good question. So we've got another question here that is the technology behind integrating across sites related to web components, so webcomponents.org. And then you're adding easy ways to build and then integrate this with Squiz services. So this is a really good question, actually. And this is, I know we've mixed some, deep on the developer side versus some of the governance and business user aspects, but this is more on the implementation and development side is, so web components is a particular approach and framework using the web platform to build independent components that can be reused. But there's also a whole bunch of different flavors of how people do that kind of thing. So you might use web components, you might use React or Vue or any number of different JavaScript frameworks, or you might use plain HTML and CSS that's without the added benefits of packaging those up in a front-end package. Our platform, so our component service is agnostic to this. It's not just saying web components, here's the specific front-end approach and packaging that up and giving you a way to do web components. It's purely a way to do front-end components however you want to implement them. So you can build components in React that work in React purely client-side. You can also build components in React in an isomorphic way, so using React service in your server-side code as well as your front-end code. And you could also use any other framework of your choice that works in that way. You can use web components. You can also use your plain HTML. In fact, you can also do things like generate XML, or you can have a JSON endpoint for your component. We didn't touch on that because it's probably getting in a bit more into the weeds on the developer side. But you can output your component as a data structure that might be consumed by a different front end, like a mobile app or some other platform as well. So the main point I wanted to answer that question is we're agnostic. You can use those components to deliver a range of different approaches. We're not trying to lock into one particular front end approach for building those. Excellent. And I think that is, unless anyone has any last questions to come through, I think that might be it for the questions. So I'll just give that a moment in case there's anything else coming in. And all right, I think that looks like it. So that brings our session to a close. Just want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for your questions as well. Look out for the webinar recording in your inbox. That'll come through shortly. And yeah, thanks for joining. If you want to know anything more, please reach out to your account manager, or alternatively, you can send us an email at ask@squiz.net. So you can email us directly, ask@squiz.net, and we'll get back to you as well. But yeah, thanks very much for your time, and yeah, thanks a lot.